There's a truth men run from. A woman doesn't desire you because you chase her. She desires you because you've become the kind of man she can feel, even in silence. Desire isn't created through effort. It's created through energy, through presence, through the way you carry your shadows and your strength. Tonight we go into the psychology of desire, not tricks, not games, just raw masculine gravity. The man who is comfortable in his own darkness. Most men fear their flaws, they fear their weaknesses, their regrets, the chapters of their story they wish they could erase. And because they fear these things, they hide them, behind loudness, behind ego, behind pretend confidence that cracks the moment someone looks too closely. A woman senses that fear instantly, not through words, but through energy, through the tension in a man's face when she asks a simple question, through the way he tries too hard to impress, through the way he avoids silence because silence exposes the truth. A man who runs from his darkness is always restless, always performing, always trying to prove something, and you cannot desire someone who is at war with himself, but a man who has walked through his own storms. A man who has looked into the mirror on his worst days, who has confronted the parts of himself he once tried to bury, who has faced rejection, failure, heartbreak, shame, and didn't break. That man carries a different weight. He moves differently, speaks differently, listens differently. There's a steadiness in him that cannot be faked, a calm that was earned through suffering, a strength built in the dark when no one was watching. He knows his wounds. He doesn't pretend they never existed. He understands them. He knows which scars shaped him, which mistakes rebuilt him, which losses sharpened his edges. He doesn't apologize for the journey that made him who he is. He doesn't hide the broken pieces. He reforges them. He wears his scars like armor, not because he wants admiration, but because he no longer fears judgment. And that changes everything. Depth is not created by perfection. Depth is created by surviving yourself. While shallow men chase validation, the darker, more grounded man stands rooted in who he has become. He doesn't need to be the loudest in the room. He doesn't need to convince anyone of his value. His presence does the speaking for him. A woman feels something different around a man like this, something steady, something real, something rare, not the cheap confidence of a man who memorized lines and tactics, but the quiet gravitational pull of someone who has faced his inner chaos and turned it into order. A man who is comfortable in his own darkness doesn't fear silence. He doesn't fear emotional intensity. He doesn't fear honesty, because he's already been honest with himself. When he looks at her, he sees her clearly. Not as an escape, not as a distraction, not as a solution, but as another human being with her own storms, her own shadows, her own scars. He can hold space for her emotions because he has held space for his own. He doesn't panic when someone gets close. He doesn't collapse under pressure. He doesn't cling for reassurance. He's been through too much for that. He remains centered even when things get complicated, and that steadiness becomes its own kind of magnetism. Most men want to be desired before they've even built themselves. But the man who has truly lived, the man who has tasted rock bottom, who has been humbled by life, who has rebuilt himself from places he thought he would never come back from, he becomes desirable without effort. Because in him a woman doesn't just see a man. She sees character, she sees resilience, she sees maturity, gravity, substance, qualities that cannot be copied or faked. There is something undeniably compelling about a man who embraces all of himself, the light and the dark, the victories and the failures, the softness and the steel. His authenticity becomes an antidote to a world full of masks. And that authenticity creates desire. Men like that are rare. And rarity has its own power, not because he tries to be different, but because he dared to face what most men run from. He dared to evolve. He dared to sit with his pain long enough to let it refine him rather than destroy him. And that kind of man, the man who is no longer owned by his darkness, but who has learned to walk with it, is the kind of man people desire naturally. not for what he pretends to be, but for what he has truly become. Indifference to outcome. There is a truth men rarely understand. Nothing is more attractive than a man who does not need the result. Not because he's pretending to be above it, not because he's acting like he doesn't care, but because he is already full, already grounded, already whole. Most men walk into situations with women carrying a silent desperation. They may hide it behind jokes, confidence, or bravado, but the energy is there, a hunger for validation, a fear of rejection, a need to be chosen, and nothing kills desire faster than needing approval to feel like a man. When you need the outcome, when you grip it with anxious hands, you stop being yourself, you distort your behavior, you start calculating every word, every message, every move, hoping it will lead to the result you want. You lose your center, and women feel that instantly. But the man who is indifferent to the outcome, whose sense of value is not tied to whether she says yes or no, moves through the world with an entirely different presence. This man doesn't fear the possibility of loss. He doesn't treat romantic interest like a lifeline. He doesn't see a woman as the missing piece that will complete him, because his life is already full. He has purpose, goals, discipline, internal richness. He has a direction that doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. He can walk away, he can stay, but whichever path he takes, he remains whole, unaffected, rooted in his own identity. This is not arrogance. This is not emotional coldness. This is a man who has taken responsibility for his happiness, so he never becomes dependent on anybody else for it. When a man reaches this level of internal stability, the irony is unmistakable. The moment he no longer needs approval, he starts receiving it effortlessly. There's a reason for this. People are naturally drawn to certainty, to stability, to someone who is anchored rather than drifting. A man who is indifferent to outcome radiates a subtle confidence, a quiet strength that says, I want you, but I don't need you. I care, but I won't collapse. I'm here, but I won't chase. I desire connection, but I won't abandon myself for it. And that is powerful, because it removes pressure. It removes the emotional weight that scares people away. Instead of forcing the situation, he allows it to unfold naturally. He speaks honestly, not strategically. He listens with clarity, not fear. He acts from intention, not insecurity. This kind of man becomes unpredictable in the best way, not because he's playing games, but because he is guided by inner standards, not external reactions. He chooses out of desire, not desperation. He stays out of interest, not insecurity. He leaves out of self-respect, not anger. Women sense this independence. They sense the emotional discipline. They sense the life he has beyond them, a life that continues with or without their presence. That alone creates attraction, because most men try to offer attention as their value. But this man offers a stable center, a grounded presence, a life with depth, and desire naturally flows toward whatever is grounded. Being indifferent to the outcome doesn't mean being detached from emotion. It doesn't mean being numb, careless, or dismissive. It simply means that you refuse to place your worth in someone else's hands. You know who you are. You know what you bring. You know that rejection doesn't define you, and acceptance doesn't complete you. That's why your energy is different. That's why your presence is rare. While others chase validation, you chase growth. While others try to impress, you try to express. While others build their lives around someone else, you build your life from the inside out. And that is what makes you magnetic. You do not need the outcome. You do not fear the outcome. You simply allow it. Because a man who is whole before love remains whole through love and after love, and a man like that, a man who stands untouched by the push and pull of external validation, naturally becomes the kind of man others desire, not because he tries, not because he manipulates, but because he is anchored, centered, complete, and no outcome can shake a foundation like that. Stillness over noise. We live in a world that never stops shouting. People fight to be seen, to be heard, to be chosen. They talk endlessly, overshare their emotions, rush to prove their worth, and drown themselves in noise because silence exposes what they fear most, the truth about who they are. But in a world loud with desperation, stillness becomes power. There is a unique intensity in a man who does not rush to speak, who does not scramble for approval, who does not spill his emotions carelessly just to fill the air. His quietness is not emptiness, it's control, it's awareness, it's presence. When a man is grounded in stillness, he becomes magnetic without trying, because stillness is rare, and rarity always draws attention. Your silence speaks, not the silence of weakness, distance, or coldness, but the silence of a man who knows himself, the silence of someone who does not need noise to be significant, a man whose mind is calm enough to hear what others ignore, and whose heart is steady enough to stay composed when others crumble. Your presence speaks. Before you say a word, your energy enters the room. If your energy is frantic, people feel it. If your energy is calm, they feel that too. Stillness is not about being passive, it is about emanating a quiet confidence. A grounded certainty that says, I am in control of myself, I don't need attention to feel whole, I'm not here to prove anything. That alone separates you from the masses. Your self-control speaks. Not the rigid, soulless discipline of someone suppressing his emotions, but the mature discipline of a man who chooses his responses deliberately. He doesn't explode in anger. He doesn't beg out of insecurity. He doesn't panic when things don't go his way. He doesn't crumble under pressure. He takes a breath, observes, thinks, responds, not reacts. And that difference changes everything. Women gravitate toward the man who is not easily shaken, not because he is emotionless, but because he has emotional gravity. He can hold tension without breaking. He can face discomfort without running. He can embrace uncertainty without losing himself. A man who reacts quickly shows instability. A man who responds slowly shows mastery. Quick reactions are signs of insecurity. Measured responses are signs of depth. A man who can remain centered in the face of chaos becomes a kind of sanctuary. People feel safe around him. They feel grounded around him. They feel calmer simply by being in his presence. This is why stillness is not passive. Stillness is influence. Because in a world where everyone is frantic, the calmest one becomes the leader. His restraint becomes a mystery. He doesn't overshare, so people wonder what he's thinking. He doesn't reveal everything at once, so people want to understand him. He doesn't show every emotion on his face, so people try to read him. Mystery creates space, and space creates curiosity. But it's not about hiding anything, it's about not throwing away your depth cheaply. Stillness is the art of valuing your inner world. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your emotions, or your intentions. Not every situation deserves your full emotional reaction. Not every conflict deserves your energy. When you learn to stay quiet, composed, observant, you learn to hold your power instead of leaking it. The truth is simple. A man who is comfortable in stillness is a man who is comfortable in himself. He is not desperate for attention. He is not chasing validation. He is not seeking immediate relief from discomfort. He is not trying to fill silence with meaningless noise. He knows that silence is where truth lives. Silence is where clarity comes. Silence is where maturity grows. And when you master stillness, you master attraction naturally, because a man who remains calm becomes magnetic. A man who remains observant becomes unpredictable. A man who remains composed becomes unforgettable. Stillness is not just the absence of noise, it is the presence of strength, a strength that does not need to shout, because real power never does. And in a world where everyone is screaming for attention, the man who speaks with actions instead of noise, the man who stands centered while others spin in chaos, becomes the one people cannot ignore. Mystery becomes attraction, but stillness becomes desire. Purpose first, everything else second. Desire flows to the man moving forward, not drifting, not waiting, not pausing his life for anyone. When your mission is clear, your energy changes, your voice changes, your posture changes. A man consumed by purpose pulls people toward him without trying. He becomes a current, and others follow the current. Emotional discipline, not coldness, not numbness. Discipline, you feel emotions, but you're not ruled by them. You can listen without losing yourself. You can care without collapsing. You can love without abandoning your own center. Masculine desire is not about control over her, it's control over yourself. That is what women trust. That is what they desire, naturally.